The first time Gabriel Moretti found me awake in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, he thought I was stealing from him. I was stealing something. Time. 3 hours before my next shift. 2 before the first bus toward my apartment. Maybe 40 minutes before my eyes stopped cooperating with the accounting textbook open beneath my hands. The kitchen was almost completely dark except for the brass lamp over the breakfast table. Its small circle of light caught everything I wished it wouldn't: my wrinkled housekeeping uniform, the coffee stain near my wrist, the cracked corner of my laptop, and the red warning banner glowing across the screen. Final attendance notice. I had been staring at it so long the words no longer looked like English. Outside, Chicago was reduced to reflections. Rain traced silver lines down the tall windows. Somewhere far below, a siren passed along Lakeshore Drive and disappeared. Then I heard the front door open. Not loudly. That was the thing about Gabriel Moretti. Nothing around him ever needed to be loud. Voices stopped in the foyer. Men's voices. Low. Controlled. I knew enough about my employer to know that people waited when he wanted them to wait. Footsteps crossed the marble. One set. I closed the laptop halfway. Too late. Gabriel appeared in the kitchen doorway. His overcoat was dark from the rain. No tie. White shirt open at the collar. He looked less like the man whose name made delivery drivers straighten their posture and more like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. Still, the room changed when he entered it. It always did. His eyes moved once across the table. Textbook. Flashcards. Cold coffee. Laptop. Me. Then back to the laptop. Why are you still in my house at 3 in the morning? His voice was quiet enough to make me more alert than shouting would have. I glanced at the microwave clock. 3:07, technically, I said. I'm off the clock. One of his eyebrows moved. Barely. I probably should have apologized. Margaret, the house manager, would have. Most people who worked for Gabriel probably apologized before they even knew what they'd done. Instead, I pulled my accounting book closer. The library closes at midnight. He looked at me for a long second. Not at my uniform. At the book. You're in school? There was no judgment in the question, which somehow made me dislike it more. I'm trying to be. His gaze shifted to the screen. I reached for the laptop, but his eyes had already caught the red banner. Something tightened in his expression. You've been missing classes. It wasn't a question. My fingers paused on the lid. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind him. In the foyer, the men who had come home with him remained perfectly silent. I suddenly became aware of the absurdity of the scene. Gabriel Moretti standing in a kitchen worth more than my mother's entire apartment building, asking why the woman who cleaned his coffee rings was failing attendance at community college. I shut the laptop. That's not part of my job. His eyes came back to mine. For half a second, I wondered if I had gone too far. Then he stepped farther into the light. Not angry. Interested. That was worse. 3 weeks, he said. My stomach dropped. I hadn't realized the notice showed how long. I stood, gathering my flashcards too quickly. I should go. Claire. I stopped. He had never used my first name before. Behind him, the whole house seemed to hold its breath. Gabriel looked at the closed laptop, then at me. What happened 3 weeks ago? What happened 3 weeks ago? The question sat between us. I tightened my grip around the flashcards until the edges pressed into my palm. Nothing you need to worry about. Gabriel's face didn't change. That somehow made the silence heavier. People expected men like him to raise their voices. Threaten. Push. He didn't. He just waited. And waiting, I was beginning to realize, was another form of pressure. I slipped the laptop into my bag. I have an early shift. You're already on an early shift. I have another one. His eyes dropped briefly to my bag, then back to me. How many jobs? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the question came from a man whose kitchen had a refrigerator with a built-in screen larger than the television in my apartment. That's personal too. For the first time, something almost amused passed through his expression. Not a smile. More like surprise that I had done it twice. Behind him, one of the men in the foyer shifted his weight. Gabriel didn't look away from me. Claire. There was that name again. Low. Precise. Like he was testing how it sounded. I pulled the strap over my shoulder. You pay me to clean this house, Mr. Moretti. Gabriel. I blinked. He didn't repeat it. So neither did I. You pay me for my hours, I said. That doesn't include explanations. The words came out steadier than I felt. I expected the room to turn cold. Instead, Gabriel tilted his head slightly, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he stepped aside. Just enough to clear the doorway. You're right. That stopped me harder than an order would have. I looked at him. He had already turned toward the counter, loosening one cuff with slow, economical movements. No anger. No wounded pride. Nothing I could use to understand him. I walked past. The foyer was dim except for the amber wall lights. 3 men stood near the entrance. All of them were older than me. Expensive coats. Quiet hands. The kind of posture that made me think they noticed every exit without needing to look. None of them met my eyes. But one of them moved out of my path before I got close. Not because of me. Because Gabriel was behind me. That was the thing about power in his house. You felt it in other people first. I opened the front door. Cold rain breathed against my face. Claire. I looked back. Gabriel stood at the edge of the kitchen light, one hand in his pocket. Do you have a ride? I have a bus. At 3 in the morning? The 151 runs late. His jaw tightened slightly. I know what bus routes do. Then you know I'll be fine. A pause. He could have told someone to drive me. Could have made it happen before I finished arguing. I saw the possibility cross his face. Then disappear. Good night, he said. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because he had asked. And when I answered, he had let the answer stand. I stepped outside and pulled my coat tighter around me. The rain had softened to mist, silver under the streetlights. By the time I reached the corner, my heartbeat had almost settled. Almost. The bus arrived 7 minutes later. I sat near the back, forehead against the cold glass, watching the city slide past in wet streaks of blue and gold. My phone buzzed. For one terrible second, I thought it might be school again. It wasn't. It was Margaret. Can you cover tomorrow night? Daniel called out. Mr. Moretti has guests. I stared at the message. Tomorrow night. My managerial accounting class started at 6. I already had 2 absences left before the professor could drop me. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I typed the same answer I had typed every time for the last 3 weeks. Yes. Yes. The word sat on my screen like a tiny surrender. I sent it before I could change my mind. By 5:30 the next evening, I was back in Gabriel Moretti's house, pinning my hair up in the staff bathroom while a lecture I should have been attending began without me across town. I tried not to think about that. Thinking cost energy. And I needed mine. Margaret moved through the kitchen with a clipboard tucked against her ribs, assigning rooms, resetting glasses, checking linen. The house had that particular tension it always carried before Gabriel had guests, not chaos, exactly. More like everyone had learned to move faster without making noise. Dining room first, she told me. Then the upstairs study. I nodded. No explanation. No complaint. That was how I had gotten through the last 3 weeks. One shift at a time. By 8, the house smelled like coffee, polished wood, and expensive whiskey. Men came and went in dark coats, speaking quietly behind closed doors. Nobody introduced themselves. Nobody needed to. Gabriel passed me twice without stopping. The first time, he was speaking to a man near the stairs. The second, he wasn't speaking at all. But his eyes dropped to the tray in my hands, then to my face. Just for a second. I kept walking. At 10:15, I was carrying empty glasses toward the kitchen when Margaret called after me. Claire, can you stay through cleanup? My steps slowed. How late? Probably 1. I looked at the clock over the pantry door. My shift at the coffee shop started at 6 the next morning. Okay. The answer came automatically. Thank you. I turned. Gabriel was standing at the far end of the hallway. I hadn't heard him approach. His expression gave me nothing. But his gaze moved from Margaret to me, then to the clock. He said nothing. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, I felt strangely exposed. At 11:30, the last guest left. The front door closed. The house exhaled. I was stacking plates when Gabriel entered the kitchen carrying no jacket, sleeves rolled once at the forearms. Margaret straightened. Everything's handled. I know. His eyes settled on the clipboard. Let me see the schedules. Margaret blinked. The schedules? For the last month. A pause. Then, of course. Something tightened between my shoulders. I kept stacking plates. 1, 2, 3. Paper rustled behind me. Gabriel said nothing for nearly a full minute. Then, quietly, who covered Tuesday the 5th? Margaret answered. Claire. And Thursday? Claire. Sunday? Another pause. Claire. The plate in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. Gabriel continued down the page. His voice never rose. That made it worse. These are call-out shifts? Mostly. Did she request them? Margaret glanced at me. I stared at the sink. No, the kitchen went very still. Gabriel turned a page. Then why is she working them? Margaret's voice softened. Because she always says yes. I set the plate down harder than I meant to. The sound cracked through the room. Gabriel looked at me. I can answer for myself. I'm sure you can. His tone was calm. Too calm. I faced him. You asked for the schedule. You have it. I also have a pattern. Heat climbed into my face. This isn't your concern. It became my concern when it started happening under my roof. There it was. Not anger. Ownership of responsibility. Different enough to unsettle me. I crossed my arms. I needed the hours. Gabriel looked at the page again. Then at me. The hours are costing you school. I didn't answer. His eyes sharpened. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't asking why I had missed class anymore. He was asking why I had decided missing it was worth the price. I looked at him and hated how easily the truth had cornered me. Not because Gabriel had discovered something secret. Because he had noticed the cost. Most people only noticed whether I showed up. I needed the money, I said. His eyes stayed on mine. For what? I exhaled through my nose. There it was again. The line. He could ask. I could refuse. My mom lost her job. Margaret shifted quietly near the counter. I wished she would leave. I wished everyone would leave. Gabriel glanced toward her. You can go. Margaret hesitated only long enough to collect the clipboard. Then the kitchen door swung shut behind her. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded too loud. Gabriel placed the schedule on the counter. What happened? She worked payroll for a medical supply company. They cut staff. When? 3 weeks ago. The timing landed between us. He didn't need to say anything. I looked away first. Our rent went up in July. She has medication. Utilities. Groceries. My throat tightened at the last word. Not dramatically. Just enough to make me angry at myself. So I picked up more shifts. And stopped going to class. I missed some classes. You're one absence from losing the course. My head snapped toward him. How do you know that? You left the warning open. Once. It was enough. I folded my arms tighter. You're keeping track. No, his answer came immediately. I remembered. That was worse. The kitchen felt smaller. I turned toward the sink and reached for a dish towel that didn't need folding. My mother will find another job. And until then? I work. You already work. Then I work more. Gabriel went silent. I could feel his attention behind me. Not pity. I knew pity. Pity softened people's voices and made their eyes slide away. This wasn't that. It felt like he was trying to solve an equation. Finally, he said, I'll cover the tuition. My hands stopped. I turned slowly. No, his expression barely changed. You didn't hear the amount. I heard the offer. It's not a loan. That makes it worse. A small crease appeared between his eyebrows. Explain. I almost laughed again. Of course he wanted it explained. Men with money always seemed surprised when money complicated things. If you pay for school, then what am I? Still Claire. That's not what I mean. His jaw tightened. I stepped closer to the counter, lowering my voice. You're my employer. I clean your house. You pay me for that. Clear lines. And tuition changes them. Yes. Why? Because struggling isn't the same thing as asking to be saved. The words came out before I could soften them. Gabriel went completely still. For the first time since I had met him, I saw something pass through his face that looked almost like impact. Not offense. Recognition. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. Rain tapped softly against the windows. He looked down at the schedule. Then back at me. What if I raise your pay? I frowned. For what? For your work. That's different. Good. I studied him carefully. He had adjusted faster than I expected. Too fast. Then I glanced at the stack of schedules. If my work is worth more, so is everyone else's. His gaze sharpened. I continued. Same responsibilities. Same rate increase. A beat of silence. Then another. You're negotiating with me. You made an offer. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. So slight I almost missed it. Not amusement exactly. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. He picked up the schedule. Tomorrow morning, I'll review the rates. I nodded. Then he added, and Claire? I paused at the doorway. His voice was quieter now. Go to class. Go to class. I stared at him. For a second, the words sounded almost like an order. Then I realized he wasn't stopping me. He was opening the door. I left before I could make that distinction feel more important than it should have. The next afternoon, I sat in managerial accounting with rain drying along the shoulders of my coat and a paper cup of coffee cooling beside my notebook. Professor Ellis filled the whiteboard with variance formulas. For the first 20 minutes, I understood nothing. My brain kept returning to Gabriel's kitchen. "You're negotiating with me. You made an offer." I forced myself to look down. Numbers were safer. Numbers didn't watch you like they were trying to understand why you refused help. By the end of class, I had 3 pages of notes and a headache behind my left eye. It felt wonderful. When I arrived at the Moretti house the following morning, Margaret was waiting near the service entrance with a new payroll sheet. She handed it to me without comment. I looked at the hourly rate. Then looked again. The increase wasn't only beside my name. Everyone's had changed. Housekeepers. Kitchen staff. Weekend cleaners. Even Daniel, who called out more often than he showed up. "He did it?" I asked. Margaret's mouth tightened in a way that almost became a smile. "Mr. Moretti reviewed compensation at 7 this morning." "Personally?" "He reviewed everything personally." That surprised me more than the raise. Gabriel had people for numbers. People for schedules. People for deciding which people handled other people. He didn't need to spend his morning comparing housekeeping wages. Yet he had. I found him an hour later in the small study off the library. The door was open. He sat behind the desk with a stack of folders to his right, sunlight cutting across one sleeve. 2 men stood near the windows. Neither spoke while Gabriel read. I stopped at the threshold. One of the men noticed me and looked mildly horrified. Gabriel looked up. The entire room seemed to wait for his reaction. "What is it?" I saw the new rates. His gaze stayed on mine. "And?" "Thank you." He leaned back slightly. "You negotiated them?" I asked. "You made a case." Something about the way he said it settled differently than praise. No softness. No favor. He made it sound earned. I nodded once. "Then thank you for listening." The older man by the window glanced at Gabriel. "A mistake." Gabriel noticed. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The man immediately looked away. There it was again, that invisible gravity around him. Quiet, absolute. And yet he had spent part of his morning listening to me. That contradiction followed me for the rest of the day. Near 5, I was wiping down the kitchen counters when Gabriel came in alone. He poured himself water. No whiskey. No entourage. "You went yesterday?" I knew what he meant. "Yes." "How was it?" "Humiliating." His eyes narrowed. I was behind. "That isn't humiliating. You didn't watch me stare at a variance problem for 10 minutes like it had personally betrayed me." A sound left him. Small. Almost a laugh. I looked up. Gabriel Moretti was smiling. Barely. It vanished almost immediately. "You'll catch up. You sound very confident for someone who doesn't know my grades. I know you came here at 3 in the morning to study after cleaning my house." He set the glass down. That tells me enough. For some reason, that landed harder than the raise. I turned back to the counter. "You shouldn't make assumptions." "No," he said quietly. "I probably shouldn't." The room fell still. Then Margaret entered carrying next week's staff schedule. She set it on the island. My eyes went to my name automatically. Monday evening. Clear. Wednesday. Clear. Both class nights. I looked at Margaret. "I didn't request these changes." She hesitated. Before she could answer, I felt Gabriel's attention shift toward me. And suddenly the raise didn't feel like the most important thing he had changed. I didn't request these changes. Margaret's fingers tightened around the edge of the schedule. No, she said carefully. I looked at Gabriel. He didn't pretend not to understand. That was you. Yes. The answer came too easily. Something hot moved through my chest. You changed my hours. I changed 2 shifts. Without asking me. Margaret looked between us, then quietly stepped back from the island. Gabriel set his glass down. You said school was the priority. I said I needed the hours. And now you have the raise. That isn't the point. His expression sharpened. Then tell me the point. I stared at him. For a man who could make a room obey by lowering his voice, Gabriel Moretti had an astonishing talent for not understanding why other people might want control over their own lives. I picked up the schedule. Put them back. His eyes dropped to the paper. No, the word was calm. My pulse kicked harder. Excuse me? You have class Monday and Wednesday. That doesn't mean you get to rearrange my week. You were missing school to work here. I know what I was doing. That's exactly the problem. The kitchen seemed to contract around us. Margaret disappeared through the service door without being told. I almost admired her timing. Almost. Gabriel folded his arms. You're working 3 jobs, sleeping whenever your body gives up, and 1 absence away from losing a course you've already paid for. And somehow that gives you authority over my calendar? It gives me enough information to stop contributing to the problem. I laughed once. Sharp. You really don't hear yourself. His jaw tightened. I'm trying to make your life easier. Then stop deciding what easier is supposed to look like. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind his employees gave him. The kind that arrives when a sentence lands somewhere neither person expected. Gabriel's arms slowly lowered. I kept going before I lost my nerve. You asked why I wouldn't let you pay my tuition. This is why. His eyes narrowed slightly. Because I changed 2 shifts? Because you think helping someone means taking the decision away from them. That's not what I'm doing. It is from where I'm standing. He looked toward the schedule again. For the first time, I saw frustration break through his control. And I'm supposed to watch you destroy yourself? The words were quiet. But there was something underneath them. Not irritation. Fear, almost. So brief I could have imagined it. My anger shifted. Not disappeared. Shifted. You're supposed to ask. Gabriel went still. Behind him, rain had started again, tapping lightly against the dark windows. I could hear the old wall clock near the pantry. 1 second. Then another. His voice changed when he finally spoke. Lower. What would you have said? I looked at the schedule. If you'd asked whether I wanted class nights protected? Yes. I would have said yes. His eyes closed for half a second. A tiny movement. Almost nothing. But on him, it looked like surrender. He reached for the schedule. Then stopped before touching it. Do you still want the hours somewhere else? That question surprised me enough that I forgot to be angry. Yes. When? Friday evenings. Sunday mornings if someone wants off. He nodded once. I'll have Margaret adjust it. No special treatment. His gaze returned to mine. Your condition? My boundary. Another silence. Then Gabriel picked up his glass. Fine. I should have left. Instead, I stood there watching him. Because Gabriel Moretti had lost an argument. And nothing in the room had broken. No one had been punished. No door had slammed. He had simply listened. For the first time, I wondered how often anyone had ever made him do that. For the next few days, Gabriel did something I hadn't expected. He left my schedule alone. No mysterious changes. No drivers waiting by the curb. No envelopes. No quiet attempts to make decisions on my behalf. Just the hours I had agreed to work. That should have made things simpler. Instead, it made me notice him more. Not romantically. Not yet. I noticed restraint. The way he stopped himself from asking questions he clearly wanted answered. The way he would glance at my textbook when I studied during breaks, then keep walking. The way the staff still straightened when he entered a room, even when all he did was pour coffee. Power, I was learning, was sometimes most visible in what a person chose not to use. Friday night, I was cleaning the small study off the library after everyone else had gone downstairs. The windows were cracked open an inch, letting cool air move through the room. A stack of papers sat on Gabriel's desk. I didn't touch them. That was one rule I had never needed explained. I dusted around the lamp, emptied the wastebasket, then moved toward the windows. A gust of wind slipped through. One sheet lifted from the desk. It spun once and landed face up near my shoe. I bent down. And froze. Not because of a name. Because of the numbers. 3 vendor accounts. Different names. Same routing pattern. Rounded expense totals repeating every few weeks. The kind of thing Professor Ellis had spent 40 minutes explaining on Wednesday. Fraud didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked boring on purpose. I picked the page up by the corner and placed it exactly where it had been. Then I stood there for several seconds, staring at nothing. Not my business. That was the safe answer. I left the study. Made it halfway down the hall. Stopped. Gabriel was in the kitchen. Alone. He was reading something on his phone when I walked in. He looked up. "You're still here. Your company is losing money." Silence. His eyes sharpened instantly. "What?" "One of them, at least." I regretted the sentence before it finished leaving my mouth. Gabriel set his phone down. "Which company?" "I don't know. You just told me it's losing money." I saw a page on the floor. His expression changed. Slightly. But I saw it. "You read my papers?" The question hit harder than it should have. Maybe because I had started believing he understood me. I took a step back. "No, Claire," the wind knocked one down. His eyes stayed on mine. I hated that I suddenly felt like I needed to defend myself. "I saw numbers. That's all." "What numbers?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters if you're right." I grabbed my coat from the chair. "No. Forget I said anything." Gabriel moved around the island. Not toward me exactly. Toward the conversation. "Stop." I did. Mostly because his voice sounded different. Less command. More urgency. He didn't touch me. Didn't block the door. "I asked the wrong question," he said. I looked at him. His jaw flexed once. Then he said, "I believe you." 3 words. Quiet. Simple. But from Gabriel, they carried weight. I slowly lowered my coat. "The pattern looked duplicated," I said. "Different vendors. Similar amounts. Same intervals." He listened. Actually listened. "Could be legitimate," I added. "Could also be someone burying withdrawals inside routine expenses." "How sure are you?" "I'm a community college student, Gabriel." That wasn't my question. I met his eyes. Sure enough that I came back. Something settled in his face. Decision. Not anger. Not yet. He picked up his phone. Then stopped. For 1 second, I saw another version of him there. The man everyone else feared. The one who could solve problems without paperwork. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he looked at me. What would you do? I blinked. With the numbers? With someone who betrayed your trust. And suddenly, the question had nothing to do with accounting. With someone who betrayed your trust? The question stayed between us. I looked at Gabriel's phone in his hand. Then at him. That depends. On what? Whether you want justice or revenge. Something in his face went still. Not offended. Measured. I could almost see him deciding how much of himself to let me see. And if I told you those are sometimes the same thing? I'd tell you that's convenient for the person with more power. His eyes held mine. The kitchen felt colder than it had a minute ago. Outside, the rain had thickened, tapping harder against the windows now, turning the city lights into blurred streaks. Gabriel set his phone on the island. You think I'm going to hurt someone? I think everyone in this house is careful around you for a reason. That landed. His expression didn't change, but the silence did. I swallowed. I don't know what you do when people cross you. No, I know what people think you do. He glanced toward the dark hallway. For a second, he seemed less like the man who controlled the room and more like someone standing inside a reputation he had built so carefully he couldn't step out of it without consequences. Then he looked back at me. What would you do? I exhaled slowly. Verify the numbers. That's it? No, I stepped closer to the island, careful not to touch his papers. Trace the payments. Compare vendors. Check who approved them. Then give the evidence to people whose job it is to handle fraud. One corner of his mouth tightened. You have a lot of faith in systems. No, that answer surprised him. I have faith in records. He said nothing. People lie, I continued. Numbers lie too, if someone knows how to arrange them. But patterns get sloppy. Eventually. Gabriel watched me with an intensity that made me suddenly aware of how close we were standing. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that I could see the exhaustion at the edges of his eyes. What if the person responsible is someone I trusted for years? I hesitated. That wasn't a hypothetical. Not anymore. Then I'd want to know whether I was angry because of the money or because I was wrong about them. His gaze dropped briefly. There. That tiny crack. He wasn't worried about losing money. Gabriel Moretti could survive money. The trail was different. His thumb tapped once against the stone countertop. Then he picked up the phone. I braced myself. Instead of calling whoever I imagined handled problems for him, he opened his contacts. Martin, he said when someone answered. Tomorrow morning. I want an external audit on Moretti distribution. A pause. No internal review. Another pause. And copy legal on everything. He ended the call. I stared at him. That's it? His eyes came back to mine. You sound disappointed. I'm surprised. That I listened? That you asked. Something softened in his expression. Barely. Then footsteps approached from the hallway. A man I recognized from Gabriel's meetings appeared in the doorway and stopped when he saw me. Everything okay? Gabriel didn't look away from me. Yes. The man hesitated. Do you need me to stay? No, one word. The man nodded and disappeared. I watched him go. You could have handled this differently. Yes. The honesty caught me off guard. Gabriel slid the phone into his pocket. For most of my life, faster has usually been considered better. And now? His gaze settled on me again. Now I'm wondering what faster costs. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret before class. Come in at noon. Mr. Moretti wants to speak with you. My stomach tightened. When I arrived, Gabriel was waiting in the study. On the desk sat the same page I had seen on the floor. Beside it was a folder twice as thick. He pushed it toward me. You were right. I didn't touch it. How bad? Bad enough. His voice was controlled, but colder than I had ever heard it. Then he added, and it was someone I trusted. For the first time, Gabriel wasn't looking at me like I worked for him. He was looking at me like he needed to know what I would think of what he did next. I looked at the folder, then at Gabriel. What are you going to do? His fingers rested against the edge of the desk. For once, he didn't answer immediately. The attorneys have everything, he said. The board meets this afternoon. He'll be removed before dinner. And after that? Gabriel knew what I was really asking. The room went quiet. No private punishment, he said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. His eyes narrowed slightly. You expected one. I didn't know what to expect. That's fair. Those two words mattered more than they should have. He had chosen a slower path. A public one. One with records, lawyers, consequences that didn't disappear into rumor. And somehow, that choice changed the way I saw him. Not because it made him harmless. Gabriel Moretti would never be harmless. But restraint meant more when power was real. 3 weeks later, I took my final exam. I walked out of the classroom with numb fingers, a headache, and no idea whether I had passed. The result arrived the next morning. I stared at the screen until I laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. By noon, I had something else. An offer for an entry-level accounting position at a mid-sized logistics firm downtown. Not Moretti-owned. That mattered to me. I accepted. My last shift at Gabriel's house was on a Thursday. Margaret hugged me in the laundry room and pretended she had dust in her eye. At 7, I found Gabriel in the kitchen. Same brass lamp. Same dark windows. Different me. I placed my house key on the island. I guess this is yours. Gabriel looked at it for a long moment. Then he slid an envelope toward me. I didn't touch it. If that's tuition, I'm leaving. It isn't. I opened it carefully. A recommendation letter. No exaggeration. No power play. Just words I had earned. Reliable. Discreet. Analytical. Unusually principled under pressure. At the bottom was his signature. I looked up. Did you call the company that hired me? No. Did anyone call for you? No. Why? His gaze dropped to the key between us. Because you asked me not to. The answer hit somewhere deep. Not dramatic. Clean. For months, I had been teaching him where my boundaries were. This time, he had remembered without being reminded. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Thank you. He nodded once. Neither of us said goodbye very well. So I left. For months later, I was working full-time, taking one evening certification course, and still drinking too much coffee. At 3:04 one Saturday morning, I unlocked Gabriel's front door. The house was silent. I had texted first. He had answered with 4 words. Library's open. Come in. I settled at the kitchen table with my books. 20 minutes later, footsteps crossed the marble. Gabriel appeared in the doorway. He looked at the key beside my notebook. You kept it. You gave it back. His expression softened. He poured 2 coffees and sat across from me. No questions about work. No offer to fix anything. Just quiet. After a while, I pushed a flashcard toward him. Quiz me. He read it. His eyebrows drew together. I have no idea what this means. I laughed. Actually laughed. He looked offended for half a second, then smiled too. Outside, Chicago glittered beneath the dark. Gabriel still had the kind of power that made rooms fall silent. But that night, he didn't use it. He listened. And for the first time, I understood that maybe this was what trust looked like. Not being rescued. Not being claimed. Being given the space to choose, and finding someone still there when you did.